on the ballot this year, and one is a plan for change. And those who oppose that plan, one of the things we hear them say is that that there are going to be people who are going to lose out in that it's already decided who the winners and the losers are. Now look, we heard our young Republican president say it already in his intro. This is not a partisan issue. It can't afford to be. I know, for one thing, and what I hear out there, people are sick of the Republican versus Democrat, and we cannot allow this issue to devolve into divisions. Divisions of black and white, of east and west, of city and suburb. This issue is about development, about jobs, and about growth. Now, I believe that we need to have a discussion centered around that. What we hear also from the other side, though, is that we shouldn't rush into anything. It's a time for study. It's time for a process. Well, look back at the history on this. Going back 80 years, back to the mid-1930s, there was a charter commission. And then in 1949 and 1959, it's like every 10 years, there was a charter commission, defeated each time. And then in 1969, 10 years later, in 1970, both years, alternative form defeated. And then in 1980, the first initiative charter didn't go far enough. It didn't get rid of a lot of the row offices. It was defeated. And then in 1995, the greatest tragedy, the most authoritative study in recent time that the commissioners impaneled that recommended change very much like the change on the ballot this year, and it was killed. It never saw the light of day. Now, what have we seen since 1995? More studies, 2004, 2008. We need to act now. 2009 is the opportunity that we can bring change to Cuyahoga County. Thank you.
Rob Frost of the County Republican Party, thank you so much. Mayor Eric Brewer of East Cleveland.
Thank you, Dan. I want to first of all thank you all for inviting me to this, the young Democrats and young Republicans, as the mayor of the city of East Cleveland, a city that's had 18 elected and appointed officials go to jail between 1985 and 2005. I think that we are very well aware of what corruption does to a community. And if you look around our community, you can see that over the years, this has been something that's a sore point for many of us. I just had a conversation with a friend on Monday who indicated to me that the FBI has about 11,000 hours of taped conversations between current judges, former judges, and current public and elected officials. And so before we start talking about this changing the way we elect judges and maybe getting into this era of appointing judges, I want to remind you that we've already gone through dispelling 2 federal judges, one Alcee Hastings out of Florida and another Barbuto out of Summit County. In the United States, there are 3,058 counties, and about 40% of those that are members of the National Association of Counties have a county CEO form of government. And in that form of government, or in those counties, most of them are under 100,000 in population. Some of them have 13,000, 14,000 people living in their counties, so it makes sense to have a county CEO in that form of government. In the state of Ohio, we have one county CEO in Summit County, and I think within the last decade, the chief of staff and the chief legal counsel were investigated, indicted, and convicted. In Essex County, you have 2 county CEOs who've gone to jail. Currently, there's an investigation of the county CEO in Merced County, in DeKalb County, Georgia, in Prince George's County, Maryland, and in Wayne County, Michigan. The county CEO and his deputy CEO also were investigated. The deputy CEO went to jail. Now, there are those that say that this is a good form of government because it will address corruption, and I don't think the problem is changing the form of government that's been in existence for 202 years. I think you have broken people serving in government, and that we need to have higher standards and put better people in office and hold them accountable. What has happened over the last few months is that we've had the Plain Dealer, the same newspaper that brought us the safe investment scandal that cost us $114 million in Cuyahoga County, now telling us that county reform is something good. And as a former journalist for the Cleveland Press, I do understand that we journalists go to meetings and we're supposed to report the news. But what we've had here is a newspaper that, rather than informing its readers, has manipulated its readers into believing in something that really ought to be defeated in November. This is a bad form of government that has been proposed by Mayor Zannotti and his group. It ought to be rejected by the voters. It was poorly thought out, poorly conceived, And one of the things that I think that we appreciate, and I know we got to go, but one of the things I think we ought to appreciate is stability in government. Whenever the CEO leaves, every single member of his cabinet leaves, and so we diminish the opportunity of having any stability in those other offices.
This, we've been talking about this for a year and a half or so in this recent iteration of the potential for county reform. And just when I think I've got a handle on the issues, I lose that handle and I lose all perspective. And just when I think I sort of understand what makes the most sense, I don't know I don't really know what should happen anymore. And I think a lot of people feel that way. Mayor Zannotti, you laid out as one of the primary objectives of your proposal, economic development. Can you explain why and how this form that you're laying out, 11 council members elected from specifically from districts, not at large, a county executive, and appointed treasurers and financial officers and so forth, why that's better for economic development purposes, which is, I think we might all agree, probably one of the chief priorities for the region?
Well, Dan, I think the first thing that has to happen is the county government has to have the responsibility of being in charge of economic development for a regional-wide basis. Today they don't, so that's the first difference. It becomes a core principle and a priority of the government. Secondly, you have to have the money to make it happen. And what our proposal calls for is streamlining and reducing the number of offices that aren't necessary in county government and reinvesting that money in economic development. Thirdly, we call for the creation of an economic development authority that will be a cross-section of people appointed by the mayor of the city of Cleveland, the Mayors and Managers Association, Team NEO, it's listed in the charter, whose primary responsibility will be to help establish long-term region-wide economic development plans for the region. That's a dramatic difference than what we're doing today, and we think it's exactly what the region needs.
Harriet Applegate, why is that a bad idea?
Well, I guess I first want to make one comment about the money, the streamlining aspect. The functions of these offices that the new Cuyahoga Now folks are proposing, they will still have to be performed, the functions of recorder, auditor, treasurer. And it is the case that appointed people are making more than the elected people now, and because the elected salaries are held down through state legislation currently. So you have the people who work for these elected officials make more than the elected officials. So it's hard to imagine that you're going to be saving money when you eliminate the lower paid elected officials. But beyond that, when it comes to...
If the county isn't employing quite so many people in, say, the recorder's office, are we not saving money?
We don't know that they're going to be employing fewer people. And in fact, there's a lot of unknowns in that proposal. It's not clear how many people the new executive had the power to determine how many people he or she would hire and at their rate of pay as well.
Would the charter...
So it's a lot of unknowns, and it's hard to say exactly how much it's going to save because there's so many unknowns in the proposal.
Are there more or fewer unknowns in your proposal?
We don't have a proposal. We have a process. We are going to put a process into place that will develop a proposal, that will develop a charter, that will then be voted on in 2010.
Mayor Brewer, on this issue of economic development, I'm not entirely clear if you support, if you would advocate voting no on both of these items, or if you would support a charter review process. But how do you solve the county's economic development issues without changing the structure of government in the way that Mayor Zannotti has suggested?
Well, the reality is the county is already involved in economic development. Paul Liaski is the director of development for the county. Commissioner Jones is here. I'm sure he could elaborate on all of the initiatives that they have funded over the last few years. And so the idea that the county is not involved in economic development is absolutely ridiculous. It is involved very aggressively in economic development, and in fact,
is it doing a good enough job right now?
Well, that's to be determined. Look at the nation's economy. What we don't need right now is the mindset that changing the form of government is going to be this magic bullet that we have to bring new jobs to the region. There are a number of other things that could happen in this region that would stabilize the region even better. But just think, Dan, that John Snow is the former chairman of CSX. If you all recall when CSX and Conrail and Norfolk Southern were looking at that merger in 1998 and consolidating or splitting off the assets, every time you get involved in change, there's a cost to change.